I have been in this amphi many times. I've conducted careers workshops in here. I've done speaking in here. And this morning, I was coming here and I was texting to a friend of mine who was an MBA from 01D, and Eve knows as well. And I was like, why am I so nervous? I've spoken in this amphi many times. Why am I so nervous today? And I realized that the wonderful invitation that we got from Lisbeth was actually to talk about purpose and our own journey with it. So one, this is an invitation to talk about myself. As a coach, that's not something I do a lot. But even worse than that, for whatever reason, I decided to feature my mother in this presentation. There's actually going to be a picture of her. Anyone here have an Asian mother? Okay. Scottish, Irish, Jewish mother? Any mother? Just a mother? Great. So I'm going to feature my mother and her story in here, and it's recorded. Do not tell her. I'm hoping she never finds out, because she's going to want to go through it, and then we're going to have that conversation, which I don't want to have. So, and if any of you know my mother, please don't mention it. So who are the MBAs here? Lots of you. Who among you were the poets? Ah, not so many. Okay. So Rumi is a poet. How many people, when they read this, believe that everyone has a purpose? Okay. Okay. So of those people, how many, I'm not going to ask you to tell me, but how many of you think you could tell me what it was if I asked you? Okay, wonderful. Of those people who don't know, who would like to know? A few people, right? Good. Because it's funny, isn't it? If we all have a purpose and we all have something that is in our hearts that, is what our lives are about, how come we don't know? Where is it? Why wasn't it given to us when we were born? Why wasn't there a little, envelope? Or maybe I could do an Oprah thing now and say, under your seat, your purpose, it's hidden in an envelope. Like, why can't we do that? And my claim really is that that's because of the way we think about purpose. We think about it as something that is a thing. And people come into coaching, because now I work as a coach, and people come in and say, I need to find my purpose. And the way they talk about it, it's sometimes as though, they kind of lost it, like their phone or their keys. I kind of mislaid it along the way. And my invitation today is to think about purpose differently. It's not a thing that you discover that was sort of there all along. It's not a place that you're going to get to where it all works out. It's actually about making meaning. And those of you who've read Viktor Frankl, the psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor, who talks about man's search for meaning, his claim is that the primary motivation of human beings is making meaning, is finding meaning in their lives. And Robert Keegan, the Harvard psychologist, adult development specialist, would also say that we are meaning makers. So my invitation today is to think of purpose less as a thing that you have to find, but something that you are discovering and also expressing. It's an act of creation. And in that way, we all need to be more like artists, because that's what artists do. We take in the world. I was thinking about it earlier. It's a bit like caterpillars. We take in something, we ingest something, we digest it, and then we kind of exude something. And when we're doing that, we're working with our purpose. And I sometimes, when I'm working with clients, think about it like a strand that you're kind of weaving through your life. And you're either more in contact with it, as Laurent was saying, you're more in alignment with that, or you're less. It gets frayed, it gets forgotten, you've kind of moved away from it. And I'm going to illustrate this, I'm going to illustrate this with two different stories and some other ones along the way. One of them is the story of my mum. That's my mum there in the center in the pink nurse's uniform. And then also my own story, and then some other characters along the way. But Mum, Suki, that's her name, she answered the call to adventure. Joseph Campbell, the mythologist, talks about every story starting with this call to adventure. So she was brought up in Malaysia and Singapore, Malaya as it was then, and at that time they invited people to come to train in the UK to be nurses. And if you came and stayed in the National Health Service for a while, you got your training free. So my mum had never really wanted to be a nurse, but this was, a big adventure. She got to come to the UK, unfortunately on a ship, because she gets really seasick. But she came to the UK, and this is her with her nursing cohort. And at some point in her career, as she became a nurse, she met my dad. She was nursing him, another story. So you're not supposed to do that, I think. But anyway, so she stayed in the UK and became a nurse, and she became a geriatric nurse. And one of the things that was really painful to her was to see how the different culture of how elderly people were treated in the UK compared to having been brought up here. And the fact that people were put into hospitals or institutions and kind of left there and weren't surrounded by family, and that the last part of their life was not among their family. So she and another nurse started a nursing home. And I was sort of interviewing her by text. I didn't dare do it on the phone. I was interviewing her by text. And I sort of said, "Mum, why did you love that place?" And she said, "Well, it was like family. We were a community." And this is very much another part of my mother's journey. If you say to her, "Mum, did you have purpose?" She would kind of look at me like, "Well, I've got no time for that." But she was living a sense of purpose. She's a very practical person. She believes in practical care. We show love by practical care. She believed very much in respect for the elderly. She believes very much in community and family. These are the strands of her thread that she was weaving together. And she retired a few years ago, and I asked her, "What would you do if you had your time again?" And she said, "I would be a nurse." And when people say something like that, we know that's what vocation is, right? Vocation, living with purpose, is when we would do the same again. In fact, another way of saying it is you would do the work that you do even if you didn't get paid for it. Guess where my mother volunteers? She's 77, she volunteers in a hospital. Actually, in giving directions to people in the information desk, which is, there are probably people having MRIs who should be having X-rays as we speak, but that's another story again, and I really need to get off my mother now. But what I want to say is that she, in some ways, stumbled into her purpose and then made it. She made meaning of her life and her career as she went along. But she didn't know what it was to start with, and she didn't even go there because that's what she wanted to do. Nursing is often described as a vocation. That wasn't what she wanted to do. It was just a way to, it was an adventure. And she was in many ways what I would call lucky like Lucy. So this is a character from The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, a really favorite book of mine when I was a child. And this is the movie, I think it's called The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe. But this is the point where one of the characters discovers Narnia. So I want to just invite you to watch this. Thank you. So I just wondered if you noticed her face as she stumbled into Narnia and her face was just full of wonder. There was a point in that clip when she sort of looks back and the door is there and she keeps going. She's found herself in a world that is entrancing to her, that has something that's pulling her forward. And I always think of that, you know, in the way like my mum, she found hospitals. Most people, for some people, me probably, hospitals are a place that you don't find that entrancing. You don't go back voluntarily. But for her, they were a place of community and care and a place where what she cared about and what was meaningful for her came together. My journey is different from that in that I think what happened for me was I went into the wardrobe. You know, I answered the call to adventure. The adventure for me was going to university. It wasn't something that anyone in my close family had done. And I went to university and studied a subject which I had no idea where it would lead. It just sounded good. And when I got to university, I found out that there were all these costumes hanging in the wardrobe. And the costumes that were relevant to the subject I studied was actually politics and government. And so I thought, oh, great, I'll apply to the civil service. I applied to the civil service. I went through a whole round of interviews and various things, and I was offered a civil service job, and I took it because it was a ready-made costume. It was something that that was there. And I took that job, but something in me, I'd started as a part-time job. I was working in an advertising agency during my summer, and they asked me if I wanted to stay for longer, and something in me, that inner voice that Laurent was talking about, said, oh, that would be fun. And so I deferred my place in the civil service for a year. I took up the job in the advertising agency that dealt with a lot of charities, and I also worked part-time as a dancer. Well, I say worked, I performed as a dancer. We really didn't get paid, as far as I remember, but anyway, I was doing this thing where I was dancing and working in an advertising agency, and surrounded by all these creative people doing stuff that I really loved. And guess what? I didn't go back and take up the civil service place. For a moment, I followed what my heart was saying to do. I took a job with one of the charities that I was working with, Dr. Bernardo's, which was, the patron of which was Princess Diana at the time, because that felt exciting. But 3 years later, I found that I was sort of stuck. And then I did the thing that I'm sure many of you have done at some point in your career. You took the Christmas jumper. Has anyone seen Bridget Jones? Yeah? So the Christmas jumper, the metaphor of the Christmas jumper is something that your parents give you or your family give you, and it's ugly and it doesn't really fit you, and it's kind of uncomfortable. But you wear it to please them. So I went to law school, which was my Christmas jumper, because that was a way to, make my parents happy, make my family happy, and all of that. And again, I was very lucky. I joined a firm where, well, is it luck? I joined a firm where there was one lawyer who was doing media work. And he was just really fun to be with. He was a creative guy, also a TV producer. I went to work with him. And that's how I ended up being a TV lawyer. Suddenly I'm a TV lawyer. I'm working with film producers, TV people, writers, musicians. And again, I'm back in my happy place. I'm supporting creative people to create things. And that's another part of the thread for me. I was realizing, okay, this is it. It brought me to Asia. I came to Asia because I moved into a TV company that was owned by Pearson at the time, because I wanted to be closer to the clients. Most of my lawyer friends wanted to be away from their clients. I actually wanted to be away from the contracts and closer to working with the clients. I came to Asia. I came to Insead because I was a terrible general manager, it turns out. So I had moved over to the general management side, and I was failing. It was, to be fair to me, it was the Asian crisis at the time, but we were losing money and the company was going downhill. So I came to Insead and took some of the managing creative businesses classes, and again realized this is really what I want to do. Let me go back one. So this is cells regenerating. And the reason I included this was a regeneration period for me. And I think part of the way we find purpose is to sort of go back, forward and back, and come back to what do we love. And sometimes we stumble into it, and sometimes we actually have to kind of take stock. And it was a taking stock moment for me when I came to Insead. And the points that I really connected with were the points around creativity. So when I went back to my company, who had very kindly sponsored me, and we were growing by then, you know, the American Idol had come out, and so the company was doing really well. And I was just opening office after office. I realized that what I really liked was working with and developing creative people. And when I had my son and decided to leave that role, I sort of already knew I had the heart of what I wanted to do. And that was to work more with creative people directly. No more budgets, no more TV shows myself, actually, but working with creative people. I've included this drawing by my friend, who is actually a journalist by training, but a talented artist. And it's about what gets in the way. And I think one of the things that was really hard for me when I left was leaving the law or leaving the TV job. There was status involved. There was identity. There was, when I left the law, lots of people were like, well, you've just spent so many years at law school, and why would you leave? And when I left Fremantle Media, it was the same. It's like, that's such a great job, why would you leave? And it's confronting that and being able to get over the, well, one is fear and one is shame, and in a way, take off the costumes, take off the Christmas jumper, take off the mask, and do that. And one of the things that I wanted to say that I found is that having inner dialogue is actually tricky, to make the space for it and to be able to do it honestly. And often the way we're able to do it, because our fear and shame comes in. And actually one way to do it is to find a safe space, a person, a companion, a coach, a friend, to talk to about this. And so that's my invitation to you this weekend, is to find someone, is firstly to really think what is meaningful for me at this point in my life, like really truly meaningful for me. And then find people to talk to about it, because my last thing, this is Midnight in Paris, a Woody Allen film with Owen Wilson, and it's about the fact that he travels back through time to 1920s Paris, where all these writers were congregating and all these artists were congregating. And it's really about finding your tribe, because if you're a lawyer writing poetry, you're sort of hiding in your office writing poetry on your own, right? No one's supporting you in that. You're probably a little bit ashamed of it, to be honest. But if you are a poet writing poetry among poets, they're going to be saying to you, what are you writing? Let's read it. Finding your tribe is a really important way to help that continual process of discovering and expressing meaning for you in your life. So I would just love to feel that after this, there'll be an opportunity for you to meet some people, talk about what's meaningful, and through that help connect you to a tribe. My last point, and I'm probably over time, is just to say that in terms of the force for good, which I really believe in, Insead being a force for good, being creators and not consumers, doing what is meaningful for us, brings us out of this continual, ceaseless, senseless consumption. It's a big thing for me around sustainability, and my sense is when we're working with meaning, when we're doing what's meaningful for us, we don't need to do that. When we're creating and recreating ourselves and our lives, a lot of the things that are driving us over the edge right now go away. So thank you very much for listening, and have a lovely weekend.